Okay, can you see my screen and hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so actually, so what I'm going to talk today about is a continuation of what I had started presenting last year. So this project had the hiatus in the meantime due to other commitments, and I'm actually going back to the Northeast Pacific marine heat wave of 2013-16. So it's not a current event, or very recent event, but I think still, since these events keep reoccurring in the Northeast Pacific, I think it's also can be useful to take a look at them and try to examine their predictability. So we are very familiar, I think many of us, with the evolution of this anomaly. So the evolution of this marine heat wave, apart from the very extreme sea surface temperature condition, which made it be an extreme event, this event was also characterized by a distinctive evolution, starting in the center of the Gulf of Alaska with the blob, and then evolving along the US West Coast with different expression and intensity during the lifetime of during its lifetime. So I think both aspects, so the amplitude of the anomaly, but also the evolution and the patterns, are very important aspect that needs to be understood and predicted. So the initial onset of this marine heat wave, so in this the blob in the Gulf of Alaska, was explained in the original paper by Bond et al. In terms of local atmospheric forcing. So essentially, there was this persistent atmospheric sea level pressure ridge. Can you see my cursor if I move?
Yes, we can see your cursor.
Perfect. So, and I think this this atmospheric condition led to a reduction in the wind speed, which also led to reduce turbulent mixing. So this would be this red curve here, which at the minimum during 2013-14, and also and this led to an increased stratification, as represented here by this purple line by the Brunt-Weissala frequency at the base of the mixed layer. So these were kind of description of this initial, the formation of this initial anomaly and their intensity. But the question is there any role for maybe large-scale climate influences and also for ocean dynamics? So here I'm comparing the sea surface temperature anomaly on the left and the sea surface height anomaly on the right. And in the area where the sea surface temperature anomaly are the largest, you can see that there is also a sea surface height expression. Also, sea surface height has been can be associated with the pycnocline dynamics in the North Pacific, and in the tropics is a good representation. It's a good proxy for upper ocean heat content, and so really it's an inherent, intrinsic, and very fundamental part of ensodynamics. So can this large-scale sea surface height variation add some predictability to the sea surface temperature anomaly, to the marine heat wave? So some studies have looked at operational forecasting systems. So this is just an example for the NOAA NCEP climate forecast system version 2. And this was where the forecast for the blob anomaly. So in each panel, the black curve shows the evolution of the sea surface temperature in the area of the blob, as indicated by this square here. And the green lines are the forecast of each of the 8 ensemble members of this forecasting system. And the red line are the ensemble mean of these 80 members. So, and each panel is for initializations at different months throughout the year. So we can just see, just by looking generally at this figure, how most of the forecasts really underestimated or showed a decay of the anomaly, even when the anomaly was actually increasing. And I think something similar was shown by Jacobs et al. For the California current system. So, however, these dynamical models have biases, and they also, because of that, experience initialization shocks. So it's hard maybe to understand how much of this lack of skill is due to this problem, to this model biases, or is just an inherent lack of predictability. So for this analysis, I'm using a simple model, a linear inverse model. This is an empirical dynamical model that is constructed from observation. So in that sense is immune of these biases and initialization shocks of the dynamical models. So in this framework, the system is described in terms of a state vector X, and the changes of the state vector over time dt are due to two terms. The first one, which is in blue here, represents the deterministic dynamics, so what we can predict, and the second term is actually the stochastic forcing. So there are these two components. So in this case, the state vector, for the state vector I use sea surface temperature and sea surface height. So I characterize my system with these two quantities. And in order to reduce the number of degrees of freedoms, I'm projecting these fields on the leading empirical orthogonal functions of these fields. So I'm retaining 20 sea surface temperature EOFs and that explain 85% of the variance, and 10 sea surface height EOFs, which explains 75% of the variance. This data set, the data sets that I used, which are the HADIST for sea surface temperature and the ORA S4 for sea surface, the ocean reanalysis for sea surface height, covered the period from January 1958 to December 2015, and the domain is the tropics, include the tropics and the North Pacific. So which kind of dynamics can be captured by these simple systems? So in the LIM framework, anomalies can grow over a finite period of time from some specific initial condition, which are called the optimal initial condition, to some final states, the optimal final. This is shown here by this curve, which is called the maximum amplification curve, showing the ratio between the amplitude of the state vector at a given leg tau relatively to the amplitude at the initial time. So we can see that there is increase in amplitude over a time period ranges from 7 to 9 months, and then the amplitude decrease. So this optimal initial and final structure kind of give us a characterization of the dynamics that the system can represent. How do they look like? So in the top left, this is the initial pattern for sea surface temperature shown in shading, and for sea surface height in contour. So the sea surface temperature shows, let's see if I can, yeah. The sea surface temperature shows the structure that extends from the west coast of California toward the equator, which is similar to the North Pacific meridional mode. It has also this anomaly in the Southeast Pacific, which is similar to the South Pacific meridional modes, which are being recognized as important ENSO precursors. For sea surface height, as shown by the contours, we have positive anomalies, so deeper thermocline, more heat content, a recharged state in the equatorial Pacific, and then negative anomaly to the north, which are representative, as we will see in a moment, of westward propagating upwelling Rossby waves. And the final structure in the bottom right here shows just the full ENSO events after 7 months from the initial condition. We can actually use this simple model to evolve the condition, the sea surface temperature and sea surface height patterns from this initial state. So after 1 month, we can see that this anomaly in the tropical Pacific intensify, this negative sea surface height anomaly propagate westward, and the system continues to evolve toward its final ENSO state. And in the meantime, you can also see that there are anomalies along the coast of North America developing both in sea surface temperature and also in sea surface height. We can compute indices for this initial and final pattern by projecting the sea surface temperature and sea surface height fields on this pattern, and the results are given by these blue and red curves on the right, where the blue is for the initial and the red is for the final. They have a pretty large correlation, close to 0.8 at a lead time of approximately 5 months. And then we can use those curves to actually look at the corresponding through linear regression, the corresponding atmospheric conditions. So we regress here the sea level pressure on the initial and final patterns, and this is indicated by the black contours. So during the initial condition, the sea level pressure is similar to the North Pacific oscillation, while in the final condition, when we have a fully developed ENSO event, we have this deepened and eastward displaced solution low. So the LIM, we can say that really captures ENSO dynamics, not only in the tropical Pacific, but also its expression in the North Pacific. So how well can the LIM predict these fields? So what I'm showing here is the anomaly correlation between the observed and the predicted anomalies by the LIM. So sea surface temperature in the top panel and sea surface height in the bottom panel. So these patterns are cross-validated, namely we are retaining 5 years at a time, training the LIM on the remaining years to predict those retained 5 years. So the largest anomaly for sea surface temperature are around 0.5, 0.55 along the coast of North America. They are higher in the tropical Pacific, but actually the correlations are very high for sea surface height. So often in many areas of the North Pacific, especially along the coast and in the Gulf of Alaska, in excess of 0.8. And also, though I don't have done an exact comparison calculation here, these results are similar to what is found in the North American multimodal ensemble. So how do we predict the marine heat wave? So this is a very busy picture, so I'm going to guide you through it slowly. So here I'm focusing on a prediction for a 6 months lead time. And I'm showing the patterns for some selected seasons from the spring of 2013 to the late fall of 2015. The left panel, so the initial condition, the middle panel show the observed, and the right panel show the predicted. So if you can just look at the patterns, we can see that the LIM does predict reasonably well the evolution of the anomalies in this particular season, and this is indicated by the pattern correlation that are shown by the yellow by the numbers here on the right. In terms of anomaly patterns, in terms of anomaly amplitude, we see that in most cases the amplitude of the anomaly is underestimated by the LIM, as we have also seen for the CFS V2 before, in particular the amplitude of the blob in the DJF 2013-14, and also this anomaly during the subsequent seasons. However, during the late fall of 2015, when the big El Nino of 2015-16 was developing, I think there was both the pattern and the amplitude were captured much better. So in spite of this underestimate of the amplitude, this is still better than what we get just by using a DEMP, by considering DEMP persistence. So the anomalies that we get from DEMP persistence are much weaker overall. However, the pattern correlation is actually can be comparable. And in fact, in some cases, like in SON in the September, October, November 2014, the pattern correlation of persistence is actually larger than what we obtain with the LIM. And this can be explained because if we look at the initial state, we see this anomaly here, this North Pacific meridional mode in the initial conditions, which the LIM recognizes as an ENSO precursors, and so tries to develop an El Nino in the tropical Pacific, which actually didn't develop as fast in reality. So in that sense, I think the persistence, which is a forecast, which has some of the characteristics of the initial conditions, give us a better pattern correlation. And if we go to sea surface height, we have already seen before that the LIM tends to predict sea surface height quite well in the tropics and North Pacific. We can see that both the amplitude and the pattern correlations are quite skillful, are pretty good, and better than persistence both in amplitude and also in the pattern. Oops, yeah. So, okay, I'm just going to jump now to the conclusion. So, linear inverse model have skill in predicting sea surface temperature, and especially sea surface height in the tropics and in the North Pacific, which I think has been shown in other studies that can be comparable to the one of operational prediction systems like the North American multimodal ensemble. And I think this prediction skill is really strongly related to the representation of the tropical dynamics and its manifestation in the North Pacific. As I say, in fact, in my second point, that the tropical and North Pacific limb capture ensodynamics and also the North Pacific anomalies that are driven by the tropical Pacific. Skill is found in the prediction of sea surface height, sea surface temperature, and sea surface height fields during this Northeast Pacific marine heat wave, especially in sea surface height. And the sea surface temperature amplitudes are generally underestimated during the initial development of the marine heat wave and during the transition from the Gulf of Alaska and the US West Coast. However, the amplitudes and patterns are better captured during the toward the end of 2015 during the development of the El Nino, which is a dynamics that the limb captures very well. So, and another advantage of the simple model is that really it's much easier to understand. And so some further work will include like a diagnostic of the limb operator to try to also understand what is the link between sea surface height and sea surface temperature. And also the inclusion of some atmospheric fields to see if by including that we can actually, what this limb sees as noise can be included and provide some additional skill in the prediction. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Antonietta. That was a great way to kick us off. We're going to hold off on Q&A for now. We're going to transition to the next speaker, Charles Hanna. And then after Charles's talk, we'll have about 15 minutes for general Q&A